welcome back to this channel. Interest is increasing, and I would just like to appreciate all of you who choose to take time out of your day to spend some of it with me. It means a lot, and I love discussing and sharing this universe with you all. I am the Darklight Emissary, and this episode is on the Mechanicum, or as they are known as in the 40k era, the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Lords of Mars. Now, to start off with this faction, their origins begin long before the Great Crusade, and before the Unification Wars that brought the Emperor of Mankind into full power. Although the Emperor may have been involved directly in their rise to power on Mars, but we will talk about that as a brief speculation later. They begin in a period of time before even Old Night, which saw the galaxy isolated and led directly to the Great Crusade to reunite the disparate parts of humanity back together. The Mechanicus has stayed virtually unchanged in its dogma, beliefs, and way they operate, far longer than any other faction in the current Imperium. They are possibly the most ancient, unchanged faction in the Imperium of mankind. The best succinct way I can explain the Mechanicus is to imagine a kaleidoscope of machinery moving and shambling in your direction. Whether as an army or even as an individual, most members of the Mechanicus are modified in many eclectic and esoteric ways regarding machinery. One of the best examples of this is in a Mechanicum versus Mechanicum fight that happens in the book Titan Death in the Horus Heresy series. The amounts of chaos this faction can unleash in a fight in seconds is second to none. They ritualistically remove parts of their body over time until their entire form is basically machine, except for perhaps their brain, for the most senior amongst the Magos of their order. They really do view the flesh as being weak, and to worship the Messiah, they believe they must be as close to the machine as possible. When the Emperor united Terra during the Unification era, the Mechanicus was present on the world, stealing technology they felt those were unworthy to have on the world. And eventually the Emperor himself visited Mars. I recommend reading the book Mechanicum in the Horus Heresy series if you want to see this happen. It follows a few knights who are men that pilot small mechs, witness a gigantic ship come out of the sky, and for the first time in centuries, due to this atmospheric disturbance, it started to rain on the red planet. The Emperor disembarks from the ship and approaches one of the knights, and just by touching the knights, he heals a problem with the mechanics that had been cut there, causing uneven movement for that night. Shortly after this little miracle, the Emperor was mostly recognized by the Mechanicum as the physical manifestation of the machine god, and a treaty was signed that designated the two as equal partners. The Emperor needed the Mechanicum, because they held most of the technological knowledge humanity still had access to, and they would have been much too costly and deadly of a foe, even with the Space Marines and the Primarchs, to try and take down themselves at the time especially. Which is why, of all the Imperial factions of the era, the Mechanicum alone were allowed to keep their religion, and they viewed the Emperor as their god. They became the main source of armor and weaponry for the Astartes, so it made little sense for the Emperor to go to war with them, even though he enforced no religions on all other fronts. The Mechanicum became an embedded part of the Imperium at that moment, never to be removed. The Imperial Aquila, which had an eagle motif on it, was remade to have two heads, one to represent the Emperor and the other to represent the Mechanicum. One of the tenets of this agreement with the Emperor was to never allow artificial intelligence, because of the damage those did to the human empire during the Dark Age of Technology era, which is why you see servitors and why any rudimentary form of software or intelligence is referred to as a machine spirit and not an AI or thinking machine. For the rest of the Great Crusade, the Mechanicum played this pivotal logistical role for the forces of the Imperium. They also terraform and change entire world landscapes to match the needs of the Mechanicus and wider Imperium. However, not all members of the Mechanicum thought the Emperor was the Messiah, and there is precedence for this. It is basically speculated and rumored that the Catan, known as the Void Dragon, was fought and defeated by the Emperor on ancient Earth, and that through a possible webway connection, took the dragon to Mars and imprisoned it under its red sands. And it's possible the influence of the dragon caused the occult Mechanicum to rise to precedence on that world, in preparation for the Emperor's later plans. Even in the book Mechanicum, there is a proto-mini golden throne, seemingly prototype, made as well. So there's definitely some possibility of this being the case, although it has never been specifically called out in any lore I've ever read, that the Emperor specifically meant for it to happen this way. With the doubts of the Emperor being the true Messiah, this is how Horus was able to bring part of the Mechanicum under his influence, including Mars itself. After a brief and vicious civil war between loyalist factions of Mars and Traitor, the Mechanicum on Mars and several other Forge worlds fell and helped Horus during the Horus Heresy era. Quite a few loyalists still persisted as well, who wholly believed in the Emperor as their omnissiah, and to the point where forces of the Mechanicum helped fight in the Secret Webway War, alongside the Custodes and Sisters of Silence. Very few Space Marines and no Primarchs were entrusted with this fight or even really knew about it. But the Mechanicum was given more trust here, which I find interesting even with their forces also prone to turning traitor. But no one else could provide the Emperor help with his project, so I suppose it makes sense he would be able to trust some of them, despite their natural capriciousness and chronic infighting that helps define this faction. After the Heresy, Mars was swept clean off of the traitors, soon to be known as the Dark Mechanicum for those who survived. For the next 10,000 years, the Mechanicum becomes known as the Adeptus Mechanicus, and continues to run the Imperium's crumbling infrastructure in a very dogmatic, ritualistic way. The Mechanicus are religious scientists, so they abhor most innovation and discovery, which greatly hinders the Imperium's growth in technological areas. Most of their machines and equipment are very old, and some of the only new equipment produced are armor variants for the Space Marines, some new tank patterns, things like that. But much of their work is in maintenance and repair over creation. A few other things to note with the Mechanicus is the Titan Legions are directly related to them. While at one point the Titan Legions were a separate entity, they became an official part of the Mechanicus during the Horus Heresy era, but they still operate mostly on their own, with their own specific tech priests and crews. But it is one of the main major strategic powers the Mechanicus commands, which is a gigantic war machine of these Titan Legions, or the God Machines as they're also known. The Mechanicus also has some massive ships, known as the Arch Mechanicus. These are mostly bespoke, unique vessels, and not too many exist. Most are absolutely gigantic in size. One great example of one is the Speranza, which you can read more about in a book series I recommend called the Forge of Mars series, which takes place on the Arch Mechanicus Speranza largely. This ship can hold Titans and has entire areas where armies can practice mock warfare, and it holds many other secrets. I highly recommend it as a series, but also if you want to see how awesome these ships are and dive deeper into the Mechanicus into unknown parts of space. Ultimately, the Mechanicus is almost like an embedded hook in the Imperium. They do as much damage as they also do to keep the Imperium running, in my opinion. If you tried removing them, the damage would not be worth the recovery from it. But as a faction, I find them absolutely fascinating because there are so many different factions and different looks to them. Some of the priests look somewhat human, bipedal and all but their machine look. Some have Forsec human form completely though, and look like a spider with their brain in a jar or something on their body. They are absolutely insane on the body modification area, and their art reflects that, I find. The Mechanicus don't speak usually using normal language. Some don't even have voices anymore. They speak mostly using a language called Lingua Technis, and it is basically a form of binary machine code that goes out in bursts from priests wanting to speak with each other, when they're commanding their troops. Many view normal speech as a disrespectful to the Omnissiah and will avoid it where possible. Some of the main military forces of the Mechanicus are the Skitarii Legions. These forces are as varied as the faction itself. They are cybernetic warriors of vicious ability and carry a myriad of weapons. Some are almost tribal in their savageness, while others are more slave to their Mechanicum masters' whims and purely machine-like in their actions and weapons. These are the forces that are often focused on guarding the Titans as well. The Mechanicum is not a force you want to enrage against you, because once unleashed, they will devote endless resources to track down anyone they view as a heretic to their religion, or is doing science out of the bounds they set in their tenets. They can also just press you into their service, which also happens in the Gods of Mars books. While used mostly by Inquisitors or the Adeptus Sororitas, the Mechanicum is the one who creates a type of punished creation known as the Archoflagellant, which makes an appearance in the Forge of Mars book series. These are vicious creations where they take a criminal sentenced to death and instead replace their arms with weaponry like energized whips or blades and chemical stimulants. So not only as a criminal can you become an example of the Mechanicus rage, you also become a giver of that rage upon their enemies as well. As far as a faction I would want to be a part of, I don't think I would want to be a part of the Mechanicus, mostly due to their limitations on what you can research or learn due to their dogmatic ways, and I love to seek knowledge. The Mechanicus is so influential on Imperial policy and is so essential that not even Space Marines usually can get away with simply fighting against the Mechanicus. A great example of this is with the Soul Drinkers chapter. They have their own book omnibus, and while some of their lore is a bit older by this point and maybe a bit inaccurate, it's still a fun read that I can recommend and one of my first I ever read. And the main source of the Soul Drinkers' downfall was when the Mechanicus stole a artifact that possibly belonged to the Primarch Rogal Dorn right in front of the Soul Drinkers. The Soul Drinkers demanded it back, and the Mechanicus refused, instead threatening to fire upon their ship. A battle ensued where the Soul Drinkers boarded the Mechanicus vessel and stole the artifact back by force. The Mechanicus demanded a severe penance for the Soul Drinkers that the Inquisition was willing to carry out, and the Soul Drinkers refused and instead became renegades to the Imperium at that point. So this just goes to show that not even the Emperor's own Marines can fight with the Mechanicus, and will often avoid that fight if at all possible because of their sheer influence and political power within the Imperium of Man. As always, there's a lot more I could get into with this group specifically. I may do a focus on the Titan Legions, as they are fun to talk about, and the Titans are some of my favorite machines in this setting. As far as government is concerned within the Mechanicus, they are ultimately an authoritarian theocratic organization. Their main leader is known as the Fabricator General of Mars, and each Forge world also has a Fabricator General, but the one from Mars is considered the most senior and in authority in the organization. But priests gain authority and power by seniority and through their own discoveries and research. I almost view them as a group of more bloodthirsty professors at a university. Just imagine a professor not only mad at you about something, but they also may have a chainsaw attachment as a armature on their back that they rev up in rage on occasion, and they can also turn you into a personal servitor if you really make them mad. Priests tend to rule their own specific areas of expertise with an iron fist. Unless you are a direct colleague, you do not argue with a senior tech priest of Mars, as this is viewed as you disrespecting a priest of the Omnissiah. I think I will leave this here for now, to make sure not to make this too long. If you would like a deep dive on this faction, I could do a longer form video on them. So as always, bring your light into the dark places. Please like and subscribe to see more content like this. Leave a comment on things you'd like me to cover or discuss or feedback. And I appreciate your support. Have a great day or night wherever you are, and thank you. You